Just your reaction to the news that happened just this lunchtime with discovery that the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has arrived in Israel. He's going to be meeting with senior leaders in the Israeli government, and he's also going to be meeting the families of victims of those horrific massacres at the weekend. How significant is this?
I think it's important that he's going. I'm glad James is there, and I congratulate him for going when he's going, and he's going early, and to express our support. So I think he's done absolutely the right thing, and well done, James, for going.
I mean, these things are significant, allies showing their support. We've been talking a little bit earlier in the show about just these gestures, putting the Israeli flag on number 10 Downing Street, the colours of the flag on the Houses of Parliament, some of these gestures that do mean a lot to countries when they are undergoing this sort of horrific event. What are we doing, do you know, more than the words and the gestures of support to shore up our ally?
The various calls, we've got a call with some ministers coming up this afternoon, so I'll frankly know more in about 2 or 3 hours' time. I think there's some question about whether military aid is being offered. I think arguably the most important thing we can be doing, and it's a hugely difficult thing to do, would be to talk to our Arab partners and Arab friends in the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, etc., and just reiterate that this whole thing, everything that was happening with Israel in the Middle East was about a normalization of relationships with Israel. And what is happening is that Iran is trying to prevent that normalization and may well succeed in doing so. So we have to, and Arab countries are going to be under a great deal of pressure when they start seeing civilians die in Gaza, as is happening, to cut relationships, to put those relationships back. And we can't allow Iran and we can't allow the Hamas to effectively dictate Middle Eastern policy now between Israel and other Arab states. So there is a there's a lot of diplomatic work to be done by the US, but also by us, because we have deep roots and good ties into much of the Arab world.
And indeed, and it's very easy for most people, although previous guests in the show felt unable to do this, to condemn the atrocity by Hamas, by the terrorists. Then you get to the conversation about what is a proportionate, reasonable response from Israel. And we think what the response from America was to 9/11 in 2001 and in subsequent years, and the retaliation we're seeing now by Israel. Do you think that the Israelis bombarding the Gaza, very, very, very built-up area of Gaza, where civilians inevitably they know will die and have died, do you think that the cutting off of food, water, fuel and electricity supplies, is that all proportionate? Is that justifiable?
Okay, you raise an incredibly important point. And the problem is anything that is not 100% supportive of Israel sounds like some horrible moral equivocation. There is no justification under any value scheme known to humanity, any decent value system known to humanity. There is no justification for what Hamas has done. I would make a distinction between Hamas and what has been happening in the West Bank. There are some people in the Israeli government of an extreme right-wing tendency who are not doing their country any favors and have helped build up pressure. That does not justify in any way what Hamas has done and the slaughter of innocent people that Hamas has undertaken. But there are many Israelis who are deeply unhappy with Netanyahu's government for a variety of different reasons. And we need to respect those voices. In times of war, and especially in immediate times of war, you rally around the flag. It is a very natural human emotion. My fear and my worry is that the people who are getting more out of Israel's reaction will in the medium term be Iran and those people who wish to see devastation, pain and bloodshed in the Middle East. There's also just one other quick point, if I may, Julia, a very important one. There is a legal issue about proportionality. To stay within the law, one's revenge or counterattacking or clearance of Gaza, however you want to call it, must be proportionate within the law. And if it isn't, you can then have people attacking you, criticizing Israel for being outside the law, but also you then start to lose in the Court of Appeal. And my worry is in 2 weeks' time, we may be in a different place to where we are now, because Israel will start to lose that moral support.
Well, indeed, I think most of us would see clearly there isn't a moral equivalence between someone, killing a child deliberately with your own hands, as we saw the Hamas terrorists on Saturday in Israel, and bombing a building where the Israelis believe they've got a good intel, usually, obviously it appeared not entirely reliable on Saturday, somewhere where Hamas are hiding out weaponry and artillery, and civilians dying. The awful phrase, collateral damage. Those are human lives. Those will be innocent people who also die. But I think there is a difference in those things. However, when you are looking at basically starving out Hamas, when we're talking about making life so, and it's already grim in Gaza, making life so grim for people that the idea that they would starve Hamas out and they would get hostages back and they would basically completely defeat that organisation. You and I both know Hamas knew this was coming. Hamas didn't think they could go in with 1,200 plus terrorists, shooting people, raping, torturing, beheading people, and that Israel would go, oh, that's fine. They knew the retribution would come. They knew retaliation would come. They knew what form it would take. They will have been preparing for this. They will have the supplies. They'll have the generators. They'll have the water supplies, the food supplies. It's going to be ordinary men, women and children, and half of the population of Gaza is children, who are going to be suffering long before anyone involved with the Hamas has. How do we square that?
Very good question, and I suspect the answer is right now I don't have an answer, because what I know is because of the way that Middle Eastern politics works and the way that Israel thinks about its defense, is that to deter, you have to give a disproportionate response. You have to slap back much harder than you've been hit, and that becomes legally problematic. For very, very understandable reasons, nobody in Israel right now is thinking about that. They want to strike back, and they want to strike back incredibly hard, and they want to be in a position that it takes Hamas years to recover. The danger is that people who are not party of the conflict, who are hugely sympathetic and supportive of Israel, can see where that potentially could lead, that this leads where Hamas wants it to go, into the slaughter of innocent people on both sides. The more Palestinians die, the better for Hamas, the better for Iran, the better for people whose hearts are full of hate. And this is the problem right now. But the other side of the solution, you have to have somebody to make peace with. And if you have Palestinian groups that simply don't or can't make peace, then that enables people on the hard right in Israel to effectively say the Palestinians are a problem that have to be managed away. And then you create this other cycle. This could yet get worse for Israel, because the West Bank could kick off, and actually potentially more importantly from a military point of view, Hezbollah has thousands of rockets trained at Israel. And every 10 years, every 15 years, there is this cycle of warfare. And unfortunately, these non-state groups become more powerful as the price of rockets, the price of all this kit and drones becomes increasingly cheap as well.
Indeed.
So I really feel for the future of Israel, and I fear for it.
For the whole of the Middle East, indeed. Can I just ask you just finally, relatively briefly, if you would, Bob Seely, it's one of the things I find extraordinary, the criticism of Israel over Gaza. And I think there's very legitimate criticism to make long before all this about what happens to the people, 2.3 million people in Palestinians in Gaza. But I find extraordinary that they have cut off the border. You cannot go in or out unless you're an Israeli citizen with from Gaza. But there seems to be zero criticism of the Egyptians. They also share a much smaller border with Gaza, but they have a border. They have closed that off. Lots of talk about the Arab world wanting to support Palestinians. They haven't offered them safe passage. They haven't offered them a home. They haven't said, come to our country, we will make you safe and give you a better life. It seems to me there's one rule for Israel and one rule for the rest of the Arab world.
You're absolutely right. And for the woke left in the West and the political correct types, they don't care about what the Arab world do, but any excuse to attack Israel. Absolutely. And it's also worth noting that Israel was handing out until last week 19,000 work permits for people in the Gaza Strip to go and work in Israel, to go and work in jobs and to actually make a living and to be employed. Clearly, that has now come to an end. And it's incredibly sad for those non-supporters of Hamas in the Gaza Strip, what is going to be happening, because there's millions of people aren't just going to disappear, but they're going to be living in rubble and pain and suffering for years on end.